Okay, I want to say welcome. I'm Jill Armstrong, president of Elephant Artist Relief, and I'm so happy to see all of you on this cold and snowy day here in Calgary. And I think it's pretty much like this all over Alberta, so I hope you're cozy and comfortable. We're coming to you today from Calgary, Mohkinstsis, and please forgive me if I pronounce any of the names wrong in the land acknowledgement. I'm working on it. But in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Yaqsi, Nakota, and Tsuut'ina nations. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Finally, we acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and non, who live, work, and play on this land and who honor and celebrate this territory. This sacred gathering place provides us with an opportunity to engage in and demonstrate leadership on reconciliation. Thank you for your enthusiasm and commitment to join us today on the lands of Treaty 7 territory. So for any of you who just happened on this post and are not familiar with Elephant Artist Relief, after this is over, please check out other resources and whatnot and info on our Facebook page, and also on our website, elephantartistrelief.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter. Anyway, it started in 2007 when there was an artist in Calgary who had a chronic health issue that was it was flaring up, and she was unable for a while to work at her day job or on her art practice. So some friends decided to throw a fundraiser for her, and it was so successful that they decided that it looked like it addressed a really urgent need in the community to help artists who are generally underpaid, underinsured, etc. So Elephant Artist Relief became a thing, and they chose elephant as the emblem for the organization because elephants are among the most compassionate and community-oriented species on the planet. So we're happy to partner with them in that way, although they don't really know it, but maybe someday we can help them too. Anyway, we also, over the years, have developed...
You.
Okay. Are you talking to me? Sorry? No?
Is my volume not muted? Oh my God, sorry.
Okay. Anyway, besides the helping our artists out, I should mention that the way we do that is if you are an artist and you are in crisis, usually through for medical reasons, sometimes others, but they're generally some sort of health issue involved. You can go to our website and find application forms to apply for funding, and then we have a jury that assesses the applications. Other than that, we do workshops like this one, and we also have panel discussions and artist talks, and a lot of these now are being recorded, and Jackie, our programming coordinator, has created a YouTube page, so a lot of these items are actually going to our YouTube page now, so please check it out. In the meantime, during the run of this event, I want to mention this right now or I will forget. If you have any questions as we go along, please leave them in the chat, and you can direct them directly to me, Jill Armstrong, or to Jackie at Elephant Artist Relief, either one of us, okay? Today we're happy to welcome representatives from CARFAC Alberta, Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and Calgary Arts Development. And all these people are very experienced and personable in their delivery of information about grant programs available to Albertan artists and or Calgary artists. And I'd like to start by introducing Chris Carson from CARFAC, and he will be essentially the host for this afternoon and basically lay out how this is going to work today. So I'll hand it over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jill, and thank you to Elephants Artist Relief for organizing this. It's amazing to see so many people in the audience today. It kind of shows how important grant writing is and organizations that actually give money to individuals at this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Just wait. Okay, just wait. Share. And go to here. Okay, and go to. Okay. Anyway, so again, thank you for joining. What I'm going to be doing today, I'm playing host, so I am going to be talking for around 5 minutes about who and what CARFAC Alberta is. Then I'm going to be talking about, just for around 10 minutes, just a few quick tips about grant writing from my experience as somebody who writes grants, but more from my experience adjudicating what people send in. So that's where I'm going to be talking today. But first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. This is me. I have one husband. I own 2 cats. I've been the executive director at CARFAC Alberta for over 10 years now. I do have an MFA in painting from University of British Columbia, and I'm still an active artist. Okay, so what is CARFAC? CARFAC is basically an organization that started in 1968, and it's about artists working for artists. What it is it's artists advocating for artists. What CARFAC is and what's known for is this idea is, has the artist been paid? So people consult CARFAC mostly for the fee schedule, what you should be paying for work if you exhibit in an art gallery, a public art gallery, or an artist-run center, or you go to CARFAC if you have any kind of idea of how to engage with an artist. You do that through ideas of best practices. Okay, what about CARFAC Alberta? We became the affiliate for CARFAC in 2012, and we rebranded as CARFAC Alberta in 2018. We believe that artists, like professionals, should be paid for their work. We are the local affiliate or provincial affiliate for CARFAC, which is a national organization, and there's affiliates in all parts of Canada. What we do is support and defend artists' economic and legal rights and educate the public on fair dealings with artists. We have a new vision and mission. Our vision is, we envision a province where all visual artists thrive and their work and rights are respected and valued. Our mission, what we do is we advance best practices for artists, for all visual artists in Alberta through education, advocacy, and engagement. And we recognize that art is an industry. We have standards. Okay, so one of the best things or the greatest things that we've done in 2020 was a 2-year project where we developed in partnership with the Alberta Craft Council and the Alberta Media Arts Alliance Society, 7 best practices or industry standards for craft, media, and visual artists. And these documents are available free of charge on the CARFAC Alberta website, which is just www.carfacalberta.com. And what do these documents do? So they deal with the idea of contracts, agreements, and negotiations for if you ever want to use an artist's work for fundraising. They deal with the rules and advice for how to work with a commercial gallery. There's another document on how to work with a public gallery, how to organize a juried show. There's best practices for community-based artists and art projects, and best practices for public art. And there's also a kind of glossary of key terms for what all these words really do mean. So best practices are basically for both you as artists and the people who engage with artists. They provide kind of the ground rules so you can have a successful relationship working and coming to an agreement of what both sides should be really doing. So if you're not familiar with them, check them out anytime, download them. Again, they're on our website, carfacalberta.com. Okay, what else do we do? As we said, we advocate, we educate, and engage. So like here, we participate in these professional development talks, we provide advice. And what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk a bit about grants from the point of view, again, of somebody who writes grants and from somebody who actually has sat on a number of juries to adjudicate grants. And you're going to hear this both from Taylor after me and Kari after that. But to write an art grant, you need to be able to tell your story. You need to be able to sell your story so that a granting agency will fund your project. And I just want to mention here that one of the services that CARFAC Alberta provides is that, you know, if you give us a week or so, we could probably read your grant for you and make a few simple suggestions on how to improve it. So if you ever want to take advantage of that, you could just email me, and that's chris@carfacalberta.com, and I'd be happy to look at it. But again, you'd have to give me a kind of week, which we're going to talk a bit about why we say something like that kind of timeline as we go along. Okay, so what is the purpose of a grant? They're going to tell you this as well, both Kari, McQueen, and Taylor Poitras. But a grant is one of the government's tools for funding ideas and projects to provide public services, stimulate the economy, and benefit the general public. At a time of COVID-19, we're in the midst of something. The idea and the need for grants are probably more important than ever before. And I really commend, you know, all these agencies that still, of the government, that still give funds to artists. We need them. Okay, now, before you'd start on your grant writing, the advice I give you is you have to think about your art career. So before you even decide to write a grant, you have to know what you do, know what you want, know who you are. Then you have to decide, is a grant the right fit for me? What we'll find is that grants are not for everybody. So they might be for you, they might not. But how do we write grants? Well, the simple way to really explain it is you begin with a need statement, a description of the artistic need that your project is addressing. So it's kind of like, you kind of think of it as you're solving a problem. And then you support this need statement with evidence such as slides, photograph, news reports, etc. And the real advice that you always have to think about is use language and a format that it's easy to read and understand. Okay, today I'm just going to stress 2 tips that I think everybody needs to think about, and they are the words clarity and honesty. Now, clarity, you can learn from others. You can learn from me, you can learn from something else. Honesty, you can learn on your own. Okay, clarity. These are the questions you have to ask yourself. Does your proposal make sense? Do the figures, numbers in the budget add up? Do you or did you answer all the questions readers have, like who, what, when, where, why, and how? Here is something that there's, in Edmonton, the Edmonton Arts Council also gives grants. And this is something from Stephen Williams from the Edmonton Arts Council. This again is what he'd say, almost like one of these first paragraphs could be something like, my name is, I am some kind of artist or eligible applicant, and I've been participating for this amount of time. With this application, I am requesting this much money from this agency. My intent is to do this particular thing over the course of this period of time. The bulk of the grant will go to these types of expenses with the ultimate goal of moving forward in something about your career. So in other words, in one paragraph, you're probably answering everything that me as a reader is going to require. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so I've been on a number of juries, and too many grant applications fail to provide an adequate introduction of who are you who is applying? What do you want to do? When are you going to do it? Where did you come from? How are you going to do it? Why do you want to do it? And without this information, I'm left confused. So I need to know some of these questions answered as I really start reading, because then I'm going to get into it. I really find it difficult when I have to go to page 3 or 5 to find the answers to some of these questions. I need to kind of look and have this kind of preview of a kind of summary towards the beginning so I know what's going on. Okay, you always remember to answer those who, what, when, where, why, and how. So for clarity, you should have a couple of people read your proposal. Does it make sense to them? Can they understand what you are proposing? And does your proposal address what is asked in the guidelines for the grant? So you always read the guidelines at least twice, 3 or 4 times. Make sure you understand them. And if you don't understand the guidelines, reach out to your granting agency or another organization, or to an individual who could help you understand what they're really asking. Because it's very important and it's vital to really answer the correct question, because that's what everybody is looking for. And remember, when you're doing a grant, it's like writing something like a strategic business plan or something. A grant is for the future. You're likely not hear back for 3 to 6 months. So by writing a grant, you are really planning your art career for the next year or so. And remember that as success varies widely, always have a plan B in case you do not achieve funding the first time. And this grant, the way you write and answer these questions, it is really an excellent start of writing a business plan. And remember to start early. If you're thinking about applying for a grant in March, well, you should be well on your way to having a lot of it done right now so that you have time to write, rewrite, you have time for others to read and make suggestions. And as you write and rewrite, you begin to understand yourself more, and you begin to understand your art more. You begin to clarify your thoughts. Now, the second thing is honesty. Honesty is your voice, your thoughts. It's all about you. And you know yourself best. A winning grant proposal is written by you. You do you. So, are you being honest? So you have to do the research. Be aware of what a grant or an opportunity is for. And we have to remember that not every opportunity is even suited for every artist. Some might have specific rules or be directed at emerging professional artists, BIPOC artists, something that we might not be. So we have to be aware of this. We have to be honest with ourselves and say, is this grant opportunity really for me? And then we have to think about who is the intended audience for this opportunity. Are you a good fit before applying? Ask yourself those questions. So, and you think about your career some more. Again, those questions of know what you do, know what you want, know who you are. Then you can decide, is this the right fit for me? Always remember to answer in any grant those key questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And the benefits of writing a grant? Well, you get money to make things happen. And always have a plan. And if you fail to plan, then you plan on failing. Always do your homework. And that's pretty well my presentation for this little part of it. So it's my job now to introduce you first to Taylor Poitras from the Calgary Arts Development, who is going to be probably talking for around 30 minutes. Now, Taylor Poitras works for Calgary Arts Development in the Community Investment and Impact, and her position is called Specialist Individuals and Collectives Programs. So really, it's my job to say, welcome, Taylor. Thank you very much for doing this. And I'm excited to find out what CADA has to tell us about grants this time. It's over to you, Taylor. And you're muted.
One sec, I'll unmute her. Sorry, I muted everybody.
Okay, so Taylor has to, okay.
Sorry about that, Taylor.
Ah, there you go.
No problem.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no worries. I was just like, thank you for the introduction, Chris, and for such a helpful and succinct presentation. Mine are always a lot more wordy, I find. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'll try to keep it under half an hour. And are you able to see the presentation? Thumbs up. Okay. Can anyone let me know if they're able to see the presentation, just to make sure? Okay, great, thank you. All right. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Calgary Arts Development, we're commonly referred to as CADA for short. We're in our 16th year as the city's arts development and municipal granting organization. So CADA is mandated to steward public taxpayer dollars for the public good for the benefit of all Calgarians. And we believe in arts-led city building and fostering a sustainable and resilient arts sector, which we do primarily through making grants to individual artists, collectives, and nonprofit arts organizations here in Calgary, otherwise known as McQueen in Blackfoot. I was going to dive into a bunch of the other things that CADA has to offer, but I know that I speak for longer than 30 minutes when I include these slides. So if you're curious, I'm happy to send these after. These are just some of the other teams and departments that have a lot of other resources and helpful things for artists. So definitely I'll encourage you to take a look, but maybe we'll just jump right into the community investment team. So this is the department at CADA that is responsible for creating and running our granting programs, which make up more than 75% of our total annual budget from the city of Calgary. So we don't just run the processes though, we're also here to help direct you to other resources or supports. And of course, if you do choose to apply to a grant, we're here to help you access and navigate the program and to help you tell your story in an authentic and clear way. So this is the whole community investment team at the moment. So I'm on there, there's a couple different specialists, managers, and our grants coordinator, Van. Basically, the main email that you'll want is the grants@calgaryartsdevelopment.com. That's a good go-to if you're not sure who to reach out to specifically, but I'll also share my own personal information at the end of the slides here. So before we dive into grants, I wanted to first take a second to speak to our values at Calgary Arts Development and how they kind of impact and are incorporated into our programs and our processes. So beyond our mandate and the criteria of our programs, we strive to approach our work in all aspects of the granting cycle with the values of one size fits one, nothing about us without us, and virtuous cycles. So these are basically inclusive design concepts that we've been exploring over the last few years with the help of our designer in residence, JD Derbyshire, who's also a wonderful artist. So I think it's important maybe to start off in understanding these principles. They're interconnected and they work together, and they're intended to work together to address inequities that exist within the system. So one size fits one. We acknowledge that systems like granting are usually designed in a one-size-fits-all way, meaning that they're designed for the dominant culture and are rooted in colonial Western European academic systems, which create barriers for many people in our community. One clear example of this at CADA is that we currently share all of our programs and accept applications online, written, and in English, which is a barrier for a lot of people. So one size fits one intends to create an equalized sense of belonging and equitable starting points for people based on their own specific needs, requirements, and experiences. So we most often see this in practice through accessibility or accommodation policies, which offer more one-to-one support, but those are by no means a complete solution. So while we have been working on our policies and accommodations, we still have a lot to learn. And we aim to continue learning more from our communities about the specific challenges and barriers that exist. And we hope to create more entry points for access and to work with applicants in a more one-size-fits-one way. All right, nothing about us without us. We want to ensure that the work we do and support is moving towards representation and reciprocity. So nothing about us without us is an important principle which states that anytime we're creating programming, policies, processes for a specific community, and in most cases a historically marginalized community, we must do so in reciprocal relationship. So with compensation and consultation and the support of that specific community to develop and implement the work. And I think the same goes for artists applying with specific projects or activities to our programs. Nothing about us without us is the belief that if you're creating work about a specific community, that community needs to be actively engaged and consulted, and there needs to be a clear and intentional relationship there. We value and honor lived experience and the intersectional and unique perspectives and experiences of different people within our communities. I'm just going to jump ahead because I know that's a little bit long. Virtuous cycles. In the context of our programs, this means that any cycle of work should perpetuate a positive feedback loop while attempting to create positive change within a system. So a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle, which might reinforce harm or negative consequences. We believe that we have the opportunity to fail forward and approach our work iteratively and with the intent to learn. So for us, when we run a program, we try to learn and adjust to make the system and the program more equitable. We can't get everything perfect all at once, but a virtuous system of learning allows us to challenge our assumptions about the status quo and benefit from the learning journey. So this concept can also be applied to applicants in how they define and evaluate success for themselves and in their communities, and in the systems that they might even be working to challenge, change, or improve. So how will this grant that you're applying for create a virtuous rather than a vicious cycle for you and your practice? Where can you learn through not only success, but also through failing forward? All right. And in recognition of everything I just shared, we will work on one-on-one with applicants who do experience barriers to develop accommodations that suit their unique situations and abilities. So some examples of accommodations that we're able to offer are translation of written materials into other languages, including ASL, transcription of verbal meetings or audio and video recordings transferred into a written document, verbal, video, or audio applications. So if you would prefer to answer application questions verbally, you can submit an audio or video recording of yourself, or our staff can help record your responses using an online platform such as Zoom. Language interpretation for phone or video meetings, and grant writing assistance if you need help. So program specialists like myself are available to answer questions or provide feedback on your draft application before you submit. Just remember to reach out early so that we can actually give you that support. We're usually only able to guarantee feedback up to 1 week before a program deadline. So similar to Chris's comment, at least a week is good. It's also really helpful to get feedback before you apply, as opposed to after when you find out you've been unsuccessful. That being said, for most of our programs, we are able to offer feedback from the assessment committee after a process has ended. And that can be really valuable since it'll be feedback from a variety of perspectives on the jury, rather than just one perspective from a program staff. And it can also really help if you do intend to reapply to a different program later on. So we always welcome requests for feedback at any time. This is something that is new this year. We basically wanted to recognize that the limitations that our staff have to adequately support all applicant needs. So we've begun to formalize this process where an applicant can actually request assistance to help alleviate some of the costs associated with preparing and submitting a grant application. So you might be eligible for outside assistance, so paid assistance outside of the regular grant bucket. If you're an artist who is deaf, hard of hearing, has a disability, or is living with mental illness, or if you're an artist who's facing language, geographic, or cultural barriers. And so you basically just reach out to me and I'll help you through that process. We basically get invoiced by either the service provider that you're using, or you can also just ask a friend or family member who might be able to assist you, who knows you, who you trust, to help with that application, and we'll pay them. So reach out if you have questions about that specifically. All right, so now we'll get into it. Types of grants. What is a grant? I think Chris kind of spoke to this, but I'll read this as well. I think it's helpful. So in the context of public funding, a grant is a sum of money awarded by CADA to artists, groups, and arts organizations to help them pursue their creative vision, to operate, to complete projects, and to share their work with the public, whether it be local, national, or internationally. Unlike a loan, grants don't need to be repaid, but they do require follow-up reporting or other commitments in exchange for that investment. So this is usually in the form of a final report, which you usually submit online after the project has been completed. It will also include budget actuals, so you're able to reflect on what actually happened, where the money went, and all of those important things. I also wanted to take a moment to note tax implications, because it is something that's really important to think about before you even apply to a grant. If you're an individual artist or representing a group of artists in the form of a collective, CADA is required to issue a T4A tax form for the full grant amount that you receive in that tax year. So under the CRA guidelines, only the amount of money that you pay yourself from the grant is taxable as income. So for instance, if you're paying yourself an artist fee from that grant, that would be taxable. In order to show the amount of the grant that you're spending on materials, rentals, paying other artists, and all of the project expenses, you need to track all of those expenses, keep your receipts, contracts, and have written proof of payment to artists. So that way you can properly deduct those expenses come tax time. And plus the CRA might audit you and ask for those things. So it's really important to keep good track. And as always, we always recommend reaching out to a professional accountant if you have any questions or concerns about your own situation. All right, so types of grants. CADA offers a variety of programs. Some are really specific to support nonprofit arts organizations in Calgary, while others are really specifically intended to support individual artists or collectives. Some programs offer ongoing year-over-year funding, like an operating grant for an organization, while others, and most of the individual ones, are one-time funding. intended to support a specific project, initiative, or outcome. So like a project grant. Some funders might have programs that are really specific to a type of activity, like a grant for research or creation, grant for travel or touring, for sharing your work, for undertaking professional developments, or it could be really specific to a discipline, so music, dance, visual arts. Or there might be something really context specific, so a grant that is meant to relieve, a COVID relief grant, for example, or projects that address a certain topic or issue like anti-racism or truth and reconciliation. So those usually are indicated by whoever is offering the grant. They might have specific outcomes that they're seeking. So because grants can vary by type, goal, eligibility, timing, the amount that you can ask for, it's really, really important to pay attention and do your research and read the guidelines. So CADIS programs sometimes shift year over year. I'd say a lot. Even if it's not a fully new program, there will be changes within a program. And that's because we're constantly evaluating our programs, getting community feedback, and trying to look at the current context of the arts sector and many other factors. Our program cycle runs on a calendar year, so from January to December. So all of our programs are going to be announced at the beginning of every year. 2021 programs have all been announced during the first week of January, so you can take a look on our investment program page and see them all there and start to kind of plan. Every now and then we might be able to offer an additional program that wasn't scheduled. Usually that's in the case of emergency funding from the City of Calgary or through a private donation through our newly developed foundation that we have. So for example, last year we ran 4 extra programs in a year, all related to emergency relief and COVID response. So, how are grants assessed? And this is really specific to Calgary Arts Development, all of the information I'm sharing, just as an FYI. There might be similarities across funders, but just to keep that in mind. Our programs are peer assessed, meaning that a committee of your artistic peers will review applications and make decisions together through an assessment process that is facilitated by the program specialist, so someone like myself. Our programs are all multidisciplinary, meaning that applications from all disciplines are assessed together by a committee made up of a variety of disciplines and experiences. Assessors are paid for this work, and we're always looking for more nominations from the community, and you can even nominate yourself. And I'll share a link to the nomination form online as well. The commitment of as being an assessor does vary from program to program, depending on the type, volume, the size of the program, and all of those things. But usually the commitment would be 4 to 8 weeks of reading and scoring and meeting, just as an FYI. So where to start? Chris spoke to this really well, but I would say a good place to start is by considering your own artistic practice and goals. So some questions you might ask yourself are, where are you at in your career and what do you need to do next? Whether it be about research, creation, experimenting, presenting your work, professional development, business development, what goals do you want to pursue? What is really urgent, important, or relevant to you right now? How do you have a specific project in mind? And what opportunities currently exist? And what is actually feasible for you to do right now? Then, of course, read the guidelines of any program, including the FAQs, if they have them. We usually do. All the clues about what matters in a program are going to be in the guidelines, especially in the program goal, the criteria section, and in the application questions themselves. So remember that while it's our job to be an expert in the programs that we're offering, it's your job to be an expert in your own practice. So be really authentic to who you are as an artist, what you want to do, what you care about, and why it's important to you. It's your responsibility to tell a clear and meaningful story about how your work or proposed activity or project aligns with the goals and the criteria of the program that you're applying to. No matter what, the most important thing to do is reach out if you have questions. The program officers will be able to help you understand what the goals of the program are, more about the criteria, if you're eligible, how the program's going to be assessed, and if applying is a good fit based on your own personal goals or project. So ask clarifying questions and start early. Don't risk wasting your time applying to something that you aren't eligible for or that isn't a good fit. Things you can start considering early, even if you don't know what kind of programs are available, these things are usually required for most grants, is an artistic practice statement or your artist resume. So those are things I'll kind of touch on in a moment here. General eligibility, it varies from program to program at CADA, but for our individual and collective programs, this is generally true across all of them. So our individual and collective grants are intended to provide one-time funding to individual artists or collectives who pursue a professional practice. And that means that they should be demonstrating a serious dedication to developing and sharing their artistic work. But they can be at any stage of practice. So whether you're emerging, mid-career, established, whatever those mean, call them what you want. We welcome artists working at any stage of practice. And we also consider, I'll mention an artistic collective is 2 or more artists who are working together in a casual, ad hoc, informal way, who have equal and shared ownership and accountability for the success and the completion of a proposed project. And they're not a registered nonprofit. That's basically what a collective is. We welcome applications from those working in all artistic disciplines and their various cultural forms. I won't read them all, but you know, everything from craft arts and circus arts, disability arts, deaf arts, and then film, music, visual media, theater, all of those things. If you have a question, just ask. Artists must either also be Calgary-based or be able to at least demonstrate that they make significant contributions to the arts that is accessible to Calgarians on an ongoing basis. So we are intended to serve Calgary-Mohkinstsis area. And the last one, be in good standing, which just means if you have a final report from a past program that you haven't completed and it's late and you haven't talked to us or asked for an extension, we probably wouldn't accept an application from you for another grant until that's been sorted. So that's basic eligibility. And now we'll kind of jump in. I'm going to gloss over the programs that we have available for individual artists this year because I have full information sessions, full guidelines. All of that is already on the website and available for you to watch. If a program hasn't launched yet, we will do an information session all about it. So just generally, this is the first program that's running this year, and it's open right now. It's the Artist Development Microgrant, and it's intended to provide one-time funding to artists in Calgary who have been impacted by COVID by supporting professional development and business development activities. So things like workshops, mentorships, courses, trainings, residencies, business activities like web development, marketing support, small business development, those kinds of things. And we also recognize that in the COVID context, folks might need access to new technologies, space, storage, PPE, equipment, or tools in order to effectively pursue their work in response to COVID-19. Applicants may also apply for costs associated with adapting or completing work that already began prior to January 2021 and was directly interrupted or affected by COVID. So this microgrant is not intended to support the creation of new work. It's not really enough money to even do that for most projects. But if there's something like a project you were in the middle of doing, like recording an album last year, you recorded half of it, restrictions came in, and now you sort of need to pivot the way that you're finishing that album, that could potentially be something that you apply to the microgrant for. Or if you had a dance performance that now you can't do in person, it was all planned and scheduled, rehearsed and everything, and now you need to pivot and film it somewhere and post it online and figure out that could be something that is eligible for this. So the goal of the program is to really allow artists to respond to new approaches and emergent needs, reduce barriers to opportunities, and contribute to your skills, knowledge, and professional development to advance your practice. Okay. The basics of this program, you can request up to $2,500 because it's a microgrant. There's 130,000 available. The deadline is very soon. So if you haven't already been thinking about it, I wouldn't recommend just trying to shove something in, but there might be something that aligns really well. It is a shorter application and I would say a lot easier in some ways. Notifications and funds should be distributed by the end of March. And anything that you're asking for, like any activities funded through this program, must be complete by June 30th. So it's really looking for those immediate confirmed opportunities that are happening in the first part of the year. All right. The project grant program, this one is recurring. It changes a little year to year, but this program is really intended to support projects, one-time funding to support projects that contribute to the vibrancy and vitality of Calgary's arts sector. So projects could involve creation, research, development, curation, production, presentation of your work. It's really very broad. The thing to think about is, does your project have a clear start and end date and a really distinct, clear set of goals around it? And it could even be a phase of a larger project. So say you're a film artist and you just need money to support the pre-production elements. You can just apply for that. Or the production phase or the post-production phase where you're touring and marketing and things like that, or entering festivals, who knows. This program will be assessed in 2 different streams. So the program and present stream will be for applications that are really focused on work that's going to be shared to the public and accessible to the public. So exhibitions, presentations, productions. And then the other stream is specifically around creation and development of work. So projects that are really focused on artistic, professional, or business development that don't necessarily have a public component yet. This program offers up to $15,000 to individuals and up to $20,000 for collectives. The pool is there, a little bigger as you can see, and the deadline will be in the spring, so June 14th. The full program guidelines for this will be available at the end of March, so you can get a little bit of information on the site now, but full guidelines will be available a little bit later. Funds will be distributed by September. So that just taking into account the amount of time it takes to run a program and find out the results, as Chris mentioned, that's generally how long it would take for most of our programs. Activities that are funded through the project grant just need to be complete by the end of next year. So you have a lot of longer timeline to propose something. So planning ahead. All right, our last program that's available to individual artists, but very specifically to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit artists, as well as artistic collectives and First Nation, Métis, Inuit-led organizations, is our Original Peoples Investment Program. So this program supports the preservation and revitalization of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit art through art-based projects that are supported and validated by the artistic community, elders, and knowledge keepers in that community. So this was a program that was actually created by and for Indigenous artists and community members. This is the 3rd year, I believe, that it's running. So it's continually morphing as well and being updated. But overall, it's quite similar to the project grant in terms of what artists and organizations can apply for. The criteria for most of our programs are going to touch on artistic impact. So what is the impact to you as an artist on your work, on your profession, on your learning, maybe even also your artistic community, the other artists that you're engaging with. And then there'll always be some sort of criteria around public impact or community connection. So how does this work impact others that you're engaging with, your audience, who's it for, why does it matter to them? And then there'll always be an aspect around planning, feasibility. Have you done your research? Is this possible? Those kinds of elements. But the specific criteria I encourage you to look at for every single program. They'll be broken out a little bit more specifically. Again, similar request amounts for this program. The deadline is in April. Notifications will be in May, and then funds would be out in June. And then folks have just over a year to complete their projects, so middle of next year. All right, so I thought we would spend a little time and just tell me if I've gone over, because this is all stuff I can share also in a slide deck afterwards. But artist statements, otherwise known as, an introduction to your practice. This is basically going to be, an introduction to who you are as an artist and what you care about. So artist statements shouldn't be really long or difficult to understand. It shouldn't be a manifesto on your own artistic practice or an artistic expression in and of itself, but rather it should be a really concise, helpful overview of your practice. And helpful is the key word, which I've bolded. So your artist statement should really demonstrate who you are, what you value, what kind of work you make, your process or processes for making it, and why it's important to you. So these are really helpful questions to ask yourself as you work on a statement. And your artist statement will likely change over time as you and your practice does. And you might have a variety of different kinds depending on the context. And context does matter with these kinds of things. The type of artist statement that would accompany your gallery show, or maybe would be in the programming notes if you were in a play, it's going to look a lot different than the type of statement that you would include in a grant proposal. So it's not going to be specific to a body of work or a project. It's really going to be about your overall practice and goals. So this is where you have an opportunity to tell the assessment committee what you value as an artist and what's important to you and your work. This introduction provides the most significant context for how they understand the rest of your application. So if you're applying to a project grant, they'll be looking at how the project aligns with what you've told them about your goals and values and how it fits within your overall practice. An artistic resume, or CV, is a clear list of experiences that are relevant to your artistic practice. So you don't have to include stuff about other jobs that you've maybe had. It's very much focused on your artistic career. There are many, many formats for resumes and CVs, and some of them are discipline specific. For the purposes of our program, simplicity and readability are the most important things, above and beyond, having fancy formatting. Typically a dated list format with the most recent to the least recent activities is common, where it's split out with similar categories, and you include important information like dates, locations, maybe a brief description if it's not really obvious from the title of the activity. Many artists have their resumes available on their websites, which can be helpful just to take a look and see the various ways that people format or talk about their artistic careers, especially for different disciplines. So depending on your discipline, you might include things like education, training, workshops, residencies, works produced, commissions, awards and grants, past solo or group performances, exhibitions, publications, engagements, the list goes on. But it really just depends on you and your discipline and what's important. A resume or CV can be a really helpful tool for the committee to view alongside your written introduction to your artistic practice. It sort of helps give a better understanding of your history, your achievements, growth, and your community. And don't let a resume intimidate you. There are many valuable experiences and entry points into a life and a career in the arts. It's okay to have gaps in practice or times where you weren't creating or working in the arts for whatever reason. It does not have to only include professional experiences. You can include anything that helps people understand how you got here. So a little bio or a blurb at the beginning is also okay, at least for CADA. Budgeting, I'll just go over this briefly. In most of our programs, you'll use our standard template. It's really straightforward. You just list out all your expenses and your revenues. It balances to zero, and it does the math for you in the template, which is really helpful. A common question we get about budgeting is, should I apply for the maximum amount that the program is offering, or will I have a better chance if I apply for less? And we actually encourage applicants to really just apply for activities or projects that fall within the general range of what the program's offering, and then budget for what you realistically need to complete that work. Imagine how the activity or project would run ideally, and then build your budget off of that, the ideal scenario, rather than trying to work backwards from the maximum amount. If you go over the max amount that you're able to request, then you might just have to consider the scope of your project, look for where you can cut costs, or think about other funding to supplement the overall budget. Your best chances are for applying with the activity that you've done the best planning for. And if your project does exceed the grant amount that you can request, it just simply is going to cost more, then you want to include the full scope of the cost and the budget. And in that case, you'll want to show in the revenue section how you're going to cover the remaining expenses. So whether it's by applying to other granting programs, sponsorship, fundraising, in-kind donations, or a personal contribution from yourself. Grants are just one option for supporting a project. There's lots of other things you can kind of look into. If you're applying for additional funding outside of this program or a program from CADA, you just basically want to do, if it's not confirmed yet, I should say, you want to do your best to show that you've done your due diligence, your research, you're hitting the deadlines for these other programs that you're going to apply for. And in those cases, if you've done that preparation and kind of demonstrated that, the assessment committee will assume that you have all your revenues covered. use the note section of your budget to clarify line items. This is really important. Show how you calculated things. If it's an artist fee, did you reference a standard fee schedule like CARFAC? Did you use a calculation just based on hours and time? Did someone provide a quote? And this is a direct reference from the price you negotiated or the quote. If you're listing materials, you don't have to write every tube of paint in the notes, but kind of list out what are the general material costs that are included there. Things like that. And if you are receiving in-kind donations, include that in your budget because they do have a value, even if it's not cash. Someone volunteering their space for you or their time, or maybe providing the food for a workshop does have a monetary value, so include that in your budget as well. Okay, I'm almost done. Grant tips. Remember, you're not expected to be everything to everyone, and your application won't benefit from trying to write or represent yourself in a way that you think assessors might want to hear or see you. Use plain language rather than academic language or artist speak. It's often much more clear and concise if you use language that makes sense to you and to others. So avoid jargon or technical language, remembering that the assessment committee is going to be made up of folks from all different practices and experiences. And don't assume that they'll understand your specific practice or language or discipline. If you're speaking about something really unique to you or to your discipline, try to describe it a little bit and give them some context. Define your terms. Assessors really appreciate being able to easily read and understand an application because they're reading a lot of them. And I know it can be really tempting to paint a rosy, perfect picture of your practice, but having an appreciative sense of what challenges and barriers you might experience in your work or in your project and how you might move through those actually demonstrates capacity, awareness, and potential. Do your research. Make sure that you can back up what you're stating in your application. It's also really helpful to have someone who might not be familiar with your discipline or your work read your application. The questions that they ask might uncover gaps or assumptions that you're making in the story that you're telling. It can also be useful to have someone very well-versed in your discipline or in your work take a look. They might be able to point out red flags or gaps in your planning or budgeting. We talk a lot, Kata, about how grant writing is an act of storytelling, which Chris also mentioned. And this, again, does not mean that the application should be an artistic expression in and of itself or, really trying to demonstrate your fantastical writing skills, but that your goal is to paint a full, comprehensive narrative about who you are, what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and why it's relevant and important to you and your practice, and why it's important to the communities if you're engaging with others. So the assessor should be able to see a logical through line that connects all of those pieces together to the overall goals of the program that you're applying to. Boom. Okay, I'll stop there. If you want to reach out to me for any questions or more information on our programs, my email and phone are there, and Van, our grants coordinator, is also there. And I'll send a bunch of links to EAR to include in the slides if we share those. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Taylor. It's a pleasure to hear you speak, and I really learned from you every time I hear you. I just wanted to mention one thing, and that is the tax implications that she mentioned of grants. For, grants are considered income for your taxes, but they weren't considered income if you were applying to CERB and things like that. So you really have to find out, ask organizations, ask the CRA what it really means, and before you actually assume something, because grants fall into a very strange category between being income and between being not income. So just wanted to clarify that point. Somebody in the chat did ask for me to go over one of my slides for the reference at the bottom, where I quoted it from. But anyway, I just wanted to say that if you write an email to Jackie after, you can get some of these slide images from the 3 of our presentations. Just ask her and she'll send them along to you. And if anybody wants any information about anything that was in mine, you can also just send me an email and be happy to send it. But my job now is to just introduce Kari McQueen. She works at the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. She's the Arts Development Consultant in Visual Arts and New Media. And she's probably going to tell you a lot about the deadlines that are happening March the 1st. Take it away, Kari. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Taylor. You guys did a fantastic job, and in fact, have made my job a little easier because some of what I'm going to speak to and show on the slides is a little redundant. So I'll glean over those topics, unless there's something specific to the AFA, of course. So as mentioned, I'm Kari McQueen. I am the visual arts consultant for New Media Visual Arts. I also manage the Indigenous Arts project grants as well, public art gallery operating grants, and a couple other things. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen here. Cheek. Okay. Here we go. And everyone can see my screen okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so Alberta Foundation for the Arts is, of course, a provincial funder. Hey, come on. Oh, wait, now we're not going anywhere. There we go. What and who is the AFA? The Alberta Foundation for the Arts operates a little bit differently than funders, say, like Calgary Arts Development or Canada Council, and that we are not arm's length from a government. We are actually part of the government of Alberta. We are an agency of the GOA, and we're overseen by a board of directors. So in that way, we're similar to, say, a nonprofit structure. We are responsible to the government of Alberta through the Ministry of Culture, Multiculturalism, and Status of Women. I always stumble over that one. The great thing is that I have a lot of fun saying is when people complain to you that their tax dollars are paying for your art if you get a grant, that's not true because the AFA is funded by the Alberta Lottery Fund. So in our case, tax dollars don't pay for your grant. Staff like myself are actually employees of the government of Alberta, and we, of course, manage all of the AFA's programs. The AFA has you're going to see a lot of similar information here as cicadas. We have grants to organizations and we have grants to individuals. Our organization grants are broken out into operating grants and also into project grants. Right now, unfortunately, the project grants are suspended due to COVID and they're undergoing review. For grants to individuals, we host project grants that will support a specific activity, and this is on the grants on the arts development side of the AFA. At the AFA, we also hold, manage, and take care of Alberta's public art collection. So the AFA collection has its own program, which is called the Arts Acquisition Program. We nickname it AAA. And AAA is not a grant, it is a purchase program. You can actually apply to have your artwork purchased to be added to the collection at the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. We also administer 4 scholarship programs as well. There we go. Our individual grants can be broken out in this way. We have our standard individual project grants. They are broken out by discipline. We also have the Indigenous Arts Project Grant, which can host a variety of disciplines and practices under that umbrella. We also host the Queen's Golden Jubilee Scholarship. We administer this one, but it's not actually an AFA program. And that one is every March. And if you're 25 or under, you can apply for that. It's a flat amount of $5,000, and there's one recipient that is awarded that scholarship. We do have travel grants, which unfortunately are also suspended at this time due to COVID, but you can apply for projects with travel for the regular individual project grants. There are subcategories to our main projects, including ISCP Artist Residency, which is part of the Visual Arts and New Media Grant. And that is every September 1st for that one. We support individual artists who are residents of Alberta. We do not support artists outside of the province. Our grants come to a maximum of $15,000, and we do not support retroactive projects. So your activity needs to start literally the day after you submit your application or later. There are subcategories to our grants. So rather than breaking out into a marketing grant or art production grant and so on and so forth, under the individual grant umbrella, you can apply for a subcategory, which are shown on my page here. Sometimes your project may straddle some of these subcategories, and that's okay too. I think this one was kind of covered, I think, by Chris and Taylor both, but it bears repeating again. At the AFA, the question that I ask people a lot, what do you want for your grant? Why are you applying to AFA? What do you want to get? This is almost always my response that I get from people. It used to be my response too. I'm applying for a grant because I need money. I can't do what I want without money. That's a red herring. Money is not the reason you're applying for a grant. The reason you're applying for a grant is to fulfill your goals. So the right question to ask is, what are my goals for this grant? Is it skill development? Is it research, exhibition, so on and so forth? The money and the grant itself are both tools to help you succeed in your practice and reach the goals that you state in that project description. A grant is not your practice and neither is money. So that's a good distinction to keep in mind, especially because grantsmanship and the whole kind of process and philosophies around grants are very different than the act of actually being an artist. Like the other grant programs at CADA and many other funders, our grants have multiple components. In ours, you can break into primarily 3. So the detailed project description, which is the narrative or story, the budget, which tells the story of your application through numbers, and your support materials, of course. And those provide evidence and insight into the application itself. Now, in terms of the detailed project description, I won't get into the weeds with this, just in the interest of time. What I have on your screen right now are our actual criteria from the website. No matter which funder you're applying to, I agree with everything that Taylor and Chris said. Read the guidelines, read them 8 times if you have to. And if something is still not clear, call me and email me, and I'm there to help bridge any barriers or words or things that are not clear. In general, the assessment criteria are the windows to the expert panel's soul. And I say this because the expert panel at the AFA uses the exact criteria that we have on our website, showing on your screen here, to actually adjudicate your application. Excuse me. So things like the appropriateness of the budget. Can you complete the project? What is the merit of your project? What is the impact on you? And if relevant, the genre in Alberta. Growth and outcomes is also important. Budget and support materials. I actually went into GATE, our grant online system. For those of you who have used GATE before, it has its own challenges, but I've made us a mock application so I can just show you a budget form right in GATE. That's easier to illustrate some aspects of the budget that way. As mentioned before, make sure your budget is believable. Don't pad your budget. If you're adding numbers just to give you a little bit of a buffer or contingency, the expert panel is going to spot that the numbers aren't quite accurate, and that may compromise the credibility of your budget. Just as Taylor mentioned, be honest and ask for what you need, because if you ask for less than you need, that will actually impact our criteria of ability to do the project. So that's a really important aspect. Don't be shy to ask for the money you need. Artists under asking can be very common, especially emerging artists. If you're asking for $10,000 or $15,000 and that's what you need, you're not asking for too much. Provide evidence in your research. This could include quotes from websites, copies of invoice or emails from people saying they're going to work for you. Again, that builds the credibility of your ability to do the project and that you're doing the homework you need to do to move forward. And that gives the expert panel confidence in your skills and in your intentions as well. A budget, of course, must be balanced. Your expenses must equal your revenues. And if you're not a budget expert, that's when you can reach out to someone like me. I'm just going to bring up my GATE form now for you guys. So what I've done is I've gone into GATE, I've made a mock application. So here's what a GATE budget would look like. And it's a pretty standard budget. The forms that different funders have may look a little different. That's okay. So you can see here, I've made an example breaking the budget out using more traditional projects, say painting, two-dimensional work. And there's different ways you can put a budget together. You can see that I've itemized 10 units of golden paint at $50. These numbers are made up, by the way. I didn't research them. So take the numbers with a grain of salt. You can also itemize things by groups. The next line down, brushes and etc. One at $300. So if your numbers are not perfect to the penny, that's okay. because this is a projected budget, and a projection is essentially a very highly educated guess because you don't have a lot of your actual expenses. They haven't happened yet. In the case of materials like this, it's easier to find pretty good actuals in advance because they're usually in quotes on websites. We also have in budgets, it's common to have space for comments. Make sure you put comments in your budget if there's a context. Taylor spoke to this in terms of how are you coming to payments for your artists? Are they CARFAC rates, IATSE, depending where you work. Down the line here, I've also included some examples of facilities and equipment. And Taylor brought up a good point related to that. For the AFA, we will support expenses like studio rent, rental of cameras, utilities for your studio, your Photoshop subscription or other software subscription. Where we will not support you is a capital expense, which is a purchase of a computer, because that's what we all want to do. You know, say interior refinishing of your studio, buying a kiln, buying a camera. Those are all expenses that for the AFA, we will not support because capital items are things that have a use beyond the project itself. Some exemptions, because there are gray areas. There's definitely a case-by-case reality about some of that, especially if you work in the media arts, where sometimes monitors, projectors, or speakers and such may be really, really necessary for an installation to exist. So where those gray areas exist, where you can argue equally that that might be capital and it might actually not be because it's key to that art, those kind of areas go forward to our expert panel to make that decision on eligibility. Me as staff, I don't do that. As for a lot of funders, we do accept subsistence as an eligible expense. That's your living expenses, your rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, childcare, and so on. You can ask for up to $3,000 a month for the AFA. We highly recommend that you don't ask for a salary or artist fee for yourself, because that is a middleman that you're essentially collecting to pay the bills anyway. So the subsistence is intended to literally buy you time to focus on your project, not be, you know, pounding the pavement looking for work or whatever. There's no shame in saying, I need these expenses to cover my subsistence so that I don't have to get a part-time job or a contract and I can have 6 months to work full-time in my studio. There, and then you'll notice here, I'm gonna be sending these things to EAR to share with you guys if they wish after. You'll notice here too, I did this for fun in GATE because GATE is old. GATE is so 2002. It's a really old school system. If you miss entering an item, it won't calculate for you. So this is a good thing to think about on that technical side of your learning curve when you're doing granting. Grantsmanship and writing a grant is a different kind of skill and energy and time than working within any granting interface. So give yourself time to work with that grant interface, click on buttons, figure it out, learn how to navigate it, and so on and so forth, so that you're comfortable. And you can see here, I didn't put a description, and if you look at total cost is 0. So those can have impacts on your application if you're not being diligent about those things. Now on the revenue side, you'll notice, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. I've intentionally built out a budget example that is above the $15,000 amount for AFA. And as Taylor mentioned, you need to have some revenue on the other side. So I've got an example for a revenue budget here. For example, I have applied theoretically for a Canada Council grant. It's pending. I don't know if I have the grant yet. I can contribute the remainder as an applicant contribution, which is to pay for my subsistence. I'm paying for that anyway. In the cases where you have a budget larger than the actual grant and you have some pending revenue sources, it's really important in your application or in the notes in your grant to indicate that you either have the savings to cover those expenses until you know if you got the other grant or support, or have a contingency plan written in your application. This is my project if I get all of these funds. If I get partial funds, this is how I will roll the project out. Because if you don't actually identify that, AFA will hold you to running your project as proposed, whether or not you get the full amount of your revenue. Oops, okay. Back to PowerPoint. And it looks like it bounced me to the beginning. Okay. Okay, support materials. As for any application for any funder, there are often areas for you to upload or somehow provide attachments as a support material item. For the AFA Visual Arts and New Media Grant, highly recommend you have some kind of video, audio, imagery, whatever it is that represents and shares your work. The expert panel may not know who you are, and it's very beneficial for them to be able to see the work that you want to make. Now, in the case where, say, you're taking a new direction in your practice, moving into maybe a new medium or a new stage in your execution, excuse me, you can include some older works, but also perhaps include sketches, experiments, or any relevant kind of material speaking to this transition that you might make in your practice. Support materials can also include, for example, if you have a marketing kind of grant where you want to develop your website better, get your word out there, make sure you include a marketing plan. It's one thing, say, to, as an artist, present a work online in a virtual capacity, but if you have no plan to get the word out, who's going to log in or show up to see it? So those kinds of supports, especially in these COVID times, is really important. Reference letters are really great if you're an emerging artist or if you're making a large notable transition in your practice in terms of materials you're using or goals that you're lining up. Same for contracts and other kinds of documents that outline that you're accepted into programs. One last thing on a note in COVID, there have been so many wrenches thrown into wrenches in this last year and into 2021 due to COVID. So when you're writing your application, keep in mind that if there are aspects of your project that might get impacted should COVID closures come and go or travel restrictions come and go, have contingency plans in the grant. These could look like, I plan to travel in June 2021. If this gets postponed till this date, I will contact AFA and ask for an extension. Or I'm going to go to these 2 residencies in 2021. If any of these activities don't happen, I will return unused grant monies or the grant to the AFA. If you're going to be doing anything, say an outdoor show, I'm going to provide PPE for people coming. Here's my plan to have a safe gathering. And lastly, because we can't read the future with COVID, it's really helpful, even if you're not sure what those rules might be, it's like a moving target all the time for all of us. Just have a statement of, if you're traveling or doing something in the province, in the city, here's the sources where I'm going to be looking to keep up to date with COVID recommendation from governments, health bodies, and so on, especially if you're doing any travel out of province, out of country. It's good to be aware of any border restrictions or quarantine measures that are in place when you go off site or out of your city. So the overview of the AFA. We do use Gate. I've mentioned that. We advertise on our website to get a request for your user ID to Gate if you don't have one at least 5 business days before the deadline. I highly recommend at least 10. The week before deadline, we get 50 to 100 emails and calls a day. So it's going to be really hard for us to turn it around really fast. It can take up to 5 days to get that user ID if we've got 50 requests in the queue, and we do process them in the order that they come. So sooner is better. We will not accept applications after 11:59 p.m. on the day of the deadline. That's incredibly specific, but we're very firm on that. So if you click that submit button and Gate receives it at 12:05 a.m. the next day, it's late, it won't be accepted. So make sure that you're not submitting, if you can at all help it, after 11:30 at night on that deadline night, because Gate does get a little slower because we get a lot of traffic on Gate. Remember, we have all the individual grants have a deadline on March 1st, as do some other government grant programs outside of the AFA. So Gate's pretty busy at that time. And give yourself time. Remember, AFA staff work in the days. So if you're a nighttime grant writer worker, make sure that you're doing it in time enough advance that you can send us questions that night when you're working, and we have that next day to get back to you as soon as we can. So planning that kind of time discrepancy, if your schedule doesn't align with a business day, keep that in mind so that we can help you as effectively as we can. And then same as what Taylor said, for AFA, it's actually in terms of, I'm happy to review your grants, your budgets. I provide technical feedback related directly to our criteria. So I'm not going to make any comments on the merit of your project, the quality of your art, anything like that. My role is to say, hey, you say that you want to do A, B, and C, but in your outcomes, you're actually talking about the past. So in our criteria, we need to see these kinds of things in the outcomes. How would you speak to that? So that's the kind of feedback I'll give you. And same for the budget. I'll be like, oh, whoops, you have a computer in there. That's not eligible. You have to either take it out or you have to put the computer on the revenue side as something you're going to buy. So those are kind of concrete examples of how I can support you. If you want some really good thorough help, reach out to us at least 2 weeks before deadline, because after that, it's the week before is pretty challenging. I'll still do my best to get to you right away, but if I've got 50 people in the queue, it's going to be a little slower. The expert panel process at the AFA is likely very similar to CADA and many other funders in Canada. The expert panel assesses each application on its own merit, then in the context of other applications received. So what exactly does that mean? That means that if you're an emerging artist, I get this a lot, emerging artist says, wait a minute, if I'm in the competition and there's like a senior artist with 20 years, how is this fair to me? How can I compete with that? Well, the expert panel is not just looking at years under your belt. They're going to look at, okay, this project that you've asked for, you're out of school a year, you want to go to this residency that's we'll just use ISCP curatorial residency. Here's how it's going to impact your practice. Here's how it's going to expand your networks, give you experience. Here's what the outcomes are that you're going to hope for. So the expert panel may look at that and go, whoa, look, this has amazing impact on this artist at that stage of their career. That's going to have a better chance of succeeding than a senior artist of 20 years who has gone to the same residency for the last 5 years and wants to go again, because they're going to have unless they've articulated a really clear an impact statement on their practice, is there going to be as compelling an argument for growth in their practice? So it's definitely based on your own context, which is really good. Assessment according to the grant program's evaluation criteria in the guidelines. They're not there to provide a critique of your work or to make decisions based on personal taste. So as the facilitator in the room, I have no opinion in the room of any grant that's on the table, but I do make sure that our expert panels, they stay on task so we get done in a timely fashion, of course, and so that they're basing those decisions on our criteria. So if somebody were to step up and go, I don't think I like this so much because I don't like this fine craft media, it's not my thing, then my job would be to say, I understand that and that's fine, but that's our personal preference is actually not a criteria point. So when we go back to these criteria, bang, 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 this is how you need to make your assessment. So is there something within the criteria that you can identify that is reflective of why you're thinking that way? So that might be an example of me doing this to say, nope, the criteria are the only filters we get to use. Like CADA and other funders, we have a different expert panel for each application deadline. We also have 2 deadlines a year for individual project grants, March 1st and September 1st each year. And our expert panels, of course, we work really hard to make sure they're representing different regions, gender, culture, race, ages, etc. And if you apply to the Indigenous Arts individual grant program, that one is a bit of an exception in that our expert panel, always without exception, is made up of Indigenous peers, artists, knowledge keepers and elders, etc. from those communities, without exception. And you can apply for the Indigenous Project Grant Stream as an artist or creator. You can apply for traditional practices, cultural practices, contemporary and Western kinds of practices as well. So there's like a lot of range that can be covered under that umbrella, which is quite lovely. We get really diverse, great applications in that program. All recommendations. Oh, sorry, but I'm a little tired now. It's my second workshop of the day. Our grants actually take about 4 months to turn over. So if you apply for March 1st, you're going to hear back sometime in June-ish, July, and get your check usually around mid-July. This is because all of our decisions have to go to our board of directors to review and approve. So the first 3 to 4 weeks after deadline, my job is to do eligibility review on those grants. So that can be anywhere from 150 to 200 applications per deadline. Then it goes to our expert panel and they need 3 to 4 weeks to review. Then the panel meets, they make their decisions. Then of course, at the next board meeting after that, that's where it's approved. Then we are usually going really fast and hard the minute we get that board approval to get notifications out. Successful applicants will receive an actual formal letter in the mail along with your check with all the conditions of your grant. Whether you are successful or unsuccessful, you will get a gate notification letting you know the outcome of the grant as well. As for all funders, the things that all humans love to hate, final reports. AFA, of course, has final reports. They are forms that are in GATE itself as well. They're actually not too bad. They're not top heavy at all. They take 15 to 20 minutes to do if you've got your receipts and stuff in order. There's some questions to fill in the answers to. And then just update your budget to your actuals. Upload something that's a proof of completion. It could be an image of the work, photo of you at the event, so on. Click submit and you're done. Now some general information about the AFA, just for interest. On average, 25 to 30% of our applicants are successful for each grant deadline. This is across all disciplines because our budget is equalized by leadership, so that, for example, we don't have instances where film projects have 50% success rate and visual arts have 10. So, you know, that is addressed at the budgetary level to make sure that it is equitable across all the programs. If you're unsuccessful, it does not mean that your project lacks merit or that what you're doing is not valuable. Often it's something to do with maybe it's not clear in your budget, maybe your written narrative is not as clear as it could be, and sometimes funders just run out of money too. And we can't always fund all of the applications that the jury wants us to. It's a competitive process, keep trying. So here's some of the average numbers we see per deadline for the programs that we have for the individual arts programs. So you can see visual arts falls between 110 and 150, and music gets quite a few more. And a general kind of summary about grants, they can add credibility to your practice, example on your CV, but they are not your practice. It's a completely different thing. Some artists choose not to do grants at all. I know quite a few that have been artists practicing for 20 years and they don't do grants at all. That's fine. Doing the grant routine or whatever, that's up to you in terms of if it's going to be a fit. If you have the kind of practice where you find yourself turning into a pretzel every single time you try to apply for a project, it's probably not a good fit because the grant needs to serve you and not the other way around. And absolutely sit on a jury or a panel if you can. AFA is always looking as well. We also pay, and as mentioned prior, grants are taxable income in Canada. And this will be sent out after, as I mentioned, so there's some additional resources there. And you'll see I've got our civic funders in there as well. And that's it. I see our time is up. So I will stop it there and open the floor now.
Thank you very much, Kari. You did an amazing job. I'm disappointed that I didn't see any cats running around the background of your screen. But other than that, I think it was a really well done presentation. I think now we're going to go on to Jackie and Jill that are going to start with some of the questions that are in the queue, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kari, and thank you, Taylor. One of the first questions, I think this could be answered by any three of you. If your application results in a product that will be available for sale after the time covered by the grant publication, like a CD, etc., should that be considered pending revenue? And I'm going to ask you guys to unmute yourselves. One sec. And Taylor. There we go. You guys should be unmuted now. Yeah. Kari?
Start? Yeah, in the case of the AFA, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, in the case of the AFA, you can include that in your pending revenues. Just make sure if you have a really tight budget, remember that's going to knock down the amount of the grant. So you can include those sales, that is optional, but in the light of full disclosure and honesty, yeah, you can put it in there. And I should also note, if you do happen to sell artwork, CDs and stuff like that after the fact of the grant or as part of your hoped for outcomes, that's fine, because AFA is not going to penalize you for being successful.
Good point.
Taylor speaking. Yeah, I agree. You don't have to include future projected sale revenues in your budget unless you need to, I would say. Like if it's directly a part of the project you're applying for and you need to cover off expenses through earned revenue, then it might be something that you include as being projected, like at this event, I do hope to, you know, pay for some of these expenses with some earned revenue. But we definitely want artists to be able to make money and profit off of their work. So yeah, future sales and things like that are yours to keep and don't necessarily need to be included. But it could be something you report on in your final report, just to say how successful you were.
Nice.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add, Chris? Or
No, I think they just covered it really well. And the thing to remember is really keep, you know, the project deadline or the dates that you put for your project. I mean, as I say, for visual arts, you're probably going to make the sale after the date of that you have for during the project. So it really doesn't really impact at all. That's something that should be occurring anyway.
okay, thank you. I guess this is a follow-up question. They ask, what about intellectual property licensing? And that also legitimate future income?
That again is outside usually the dates of the actual grant itself, because that's kind of like copyright fees that I might be getting in 2022 to 2029 for this project I do in 2021 or 2022. So again, that's not really part of the actual grant, because all these grants like CADA has firm deadlines when they actually have to be finished. And most grants, you really say that I'm going to be doing this for the next 3 months or 6 months, and you're not doing it for the rest of your life, because you have to report on it so you can apply for something else.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. Let me get back to the question list. This is for AFA. What are the tax implications of the AFA individual grant?
Hey there. That is a good question, always. One thing to note about the AFA, we do not issue T4A slips. Like CADA does, for example. I'm not exactly personally clear on why that is, maybe because we're government. Tax implications are a grant is a grant is a grant in the CRA's eyes, in the sense that it is taxable revenue. There's some great links. Canada Council, CARFAC has some great information related to taxes. The CRA also has a page where you can actually submit your tax. It's linked to how they manage their scholarships. I can't speak more to that because I'm not a CRA expert and I don't want to inadvertently get you down the wrong path. But yeah, Taylor did make some good mentions in the past in terms of how you clock those expenses and revenues. And make sure that you just keep all your receipts for your project in case the CRA does audit you. And I recommend, in the past when I've had my own grants and then was running my own consulting business as well, if you can budget and afford to have a grant preparer or an accountant who knows and understands something about artist business or practices to help you, I highly recommend it, because they're going to pull out every single thing that can come back to you and benefit you with that filing with CRA. So yeah, definitely do look into that and keep that in your back pocket, especially if it's a large grant.
Cool, thank you, Kari. I don't see any other, oh, there's one right now. How does it work when there are a few artists working together? Do we show living expenses 3 times? What if we need work outside of our realm? Example, metal frame construction by a metal company, lighting engineer, sound engineer, etc. Do we need to get quotes for this ahead of time? It's difficult when you don't know the particulars of the work beforehand. I guess it'd be open to all 3 of you.
Yeah, we get actually, is it okay if I start, Taylor and Chris? Okay, we get stuff like that a lot actually at AFA because of being at that provincial level, I think, in terms of more regions. When you're working together as a collective or an ensemble, in the AFA's case, we allow up to $3,000 a month for subsistence, correct? Yes, and that's inclusive. So whether there's 10 of you, 1 of you, or 2 of you, it can't go over the $3,000 a month. So that's your max, no matter how many people are dipping into that, so to speak. When you're looking at dealing with engineers and other kinds of technical kind of information that's new to you, especially if you can't get a quote yet, because you don't know the exact nature of what you're going to be needing done by that particular company or fabricator, then we recommend you can also apply for AFAF for under research and production. So you can get a kind of a general quote or say, hey, we don't know exactly what it's going to cost. We've talked to the fabricator. They say this is the price range for something of this scale, you know, and here's the fabricators that we're looking at right now. So showing that you're doing that preliminary legwork is a really great thing to do in lieu of actually having hard numbers, because the grants, they're proposed budgets, right? So you're not going to have everything locked down necessarily yet. So yeah, showing that homework is a good way to say, you know what, we know how to get the ball rolling, if that makes sense.
And I think you should also remember is if you only have so much money and you can only say, I'm getting so much money for an engineering project or something like that, maybe in your mind you should think about, well, if it's going to be if I'm finding I get the grant and it costs twice as much, how can I scale back my project a little bit so it's not going to affect everything? Because obviously you might not be able to come up with another $10,000 instantly or something to add to that. So think about your project as a way with a bit of wiggle room so that, you know, if, you know, somebody actually says it's going to be 20,000 to do this specific thing, well, you might have to say, I only have 10,000 budgeted. What can you do for that that's not going to compromise my artistic integrity that much? That's what I would do.
Fabrication is really expensive.
Yeah,
Like 5, 6
amazing.
figures depending.
Yeah.
Unless it's small.
Yeah, I think they covered it off really well, especially the second part of that question. Related to collectives, at Calgary Arts Development, we used to only have like individuals and collectives could only apply for the same amount. So it would have been, you know, for a project grant up to 15. This year, based on some feedback, we're going to feel it out, and we've bumped up what a collective can request up by another $5,000. So that's even, that's partially to recognize the fact that, yes, if there's 2 or more of you, or 10 or 5 or however many, your costs might be a little bit more, even just to pay yourselves or to, you know, request subsistence or those kinds of things. So we've bumped it up a little bit this year to see how that goes. But yeah, I think everything else Kari said and Chris said. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you so much.
I have one question before I forget that I fielded when you had to step out. Just a quick one here. And this is a specific CADA question. Somebody wanted to know, do you have to be a Calgary resident to apply to CADA?
No, our grants do exist for Calgarians, like Calgary artists. So if you're not based in Calgary, you do need to be able to demonstrate that you have an ongoing relationship with Calgary, that your work is accessible to Calgarians. And so that's something you would want to probably speak about directly in your application, especially if it's not obvious in terms of like your resume and your past work. An example might be, you know, someone from the Philharmonic Orchestra lives just outside of Calgary, Tabor, you know, these surrounding communities in Alberta, but most of their work is created or, you know, done in Calgary or accessible to our audiences and to folks here. They're eligible for sure. So we don't have a hard and fast rule that if you don't have a Calgary address, you know, you're out. But if you're unsure, or even if you're new to Calgary, how do you demonstrate that relationship? Just talk to us. There's usually a way to kind of include that within your application, whether it be in your, you know, practice statement or something in your resume. But yes, did that answer the question?
I think so. I think that's pretty clear. We'll see if that person has a comment about that, but that sounded pretty good to me. Thanks, Taylor.
Jill, I missed that one. But the next one is, where do we find grant preparers? They say a quick Google search gives her nothing.
I would say, you know, really, you should be doing most of this yourself. Nobody understands you like you. And that is just so clear that I could say my husband would not be able to do a grant application for me. And he probably is with me all the time because he doesn't even understand exactly what I'm trying to do. So it's probably the same of getting somebody to write your essay in university. I probably would say I would definitely not recommend it. You will not have any degree of honesty if you get somebody else to do this for you. You have to learn to do it yourself. Most places have means to help you along. Taylor did indicate that she's willing to help people if you ask her soon enough for help, as would be most agency, and even getting an organization, or if you don't understand the language or something like that, and it's that difficulty, get somebody to help you, but make sure it's your words. That's what I'd say. What do you say, Kari?
I say, I'm wondering if I said grant preparer instead of tax preparer. Anyway, yeah, there are people who do grant writing like I used to, and I used to help artists with that, but I totally second what Chris says. The artists that did get success and get the grants when I helped them with writing and providing that service were artists who handed me their words. In that case, I worked with an artist with profound physical disability, and Canada Council paid me to help him with that physical act of writing. But in that case, he was amazing. Like, it was successful because he really directed the words, the process, the budget, and I just became his hands to help him reach that. He got his grant too, because his project was amazing. He's really neat guy out of Vancouver. But yeah, I second that. If you do actually engage someone to help you with a grant, if you cannot articulate your project, what you need, your goals, they're not going to make it any better for you. They'll probably make it worse and more vague. So totally.
Yep. Third that, yeah, it's about actually like writing the content of your project and writing about yourself and what you want to do. That needs to come from you. If it's an accessibility thing or a barrier, and you need someone to kind of assist you with physically with the act of writing, or just help you translate something or those kinds of things, staff can help. But also, I think most funders are able to sort of offer other assistance too. So if you have someone in your life who can help you with that and you trust, Kate is able to actually pay them, or, if you need a service provider, I think those ways, definitely, get assistance where you need it, or have someone edit and read your application afterwards, but definitely the content and heart of it should be from you.
Cool, thanks you guys. Next question, we have a few, and then we'll probably cap it after that. What are the possibilities for two artists living in different provinces, example for an EBC and Calgary, Alberta, working together on a project to get a grant?
Yeah, I could start. For CADA, if you are a collective of two or more and some folks are out of province, the person in Calgary who is a part of that collective would probably need to be the one to lead the project application. So submit it. You could work on it together, but they would need to be the lead applicant, and they would likely need to be the one to receive the funding on behalf of the collective and administer those funds. But yes, you can always hire and work with people from anywhere. There's no limitation on that for us.
For AFA, it's a little different. And this is really great. This question came up, actually. AFA has a definition called principal artist. It's a Theodore borrowed term. A principal artist is considered an artist that has artistic decision-making, leadership, etc., and input into that artistic project itself. All individuals in the grant, in the collective, must be Alberta residents if they are principal artists. So if you're working in a collaboration with two principal artists, one from Alberta, one from BC, it's not going to be eligible. The exception to that for the AFA is if you are an Alberta-based artist and you happen to be contracting a technician you like to work with to help do, say you were going to do some kind of live production, you need this technician, they're based in BC, but you like their work, you need their support, they're not considered a principal, that technician. They're a contract support help, because they don't tell you how to produce, they don't have any input into the artistic integrity of the show or anything. You are the one with all that control. So in that case, that would be fine. So, and if you're in doubt in terms of if you're applying for AFA in terms of what is a principal, is your collaborator a principal, make sure you reach out to me, because just because you don't call them a principal, sometimes people do that, doesn't mean they don't actually qualify as one. So that one can tangle people up sometimes. And it's a restriction that we don't always think is great, but it is there. Another example, sorry, I'll be quick. If you're curating a project and you have artists from out of province in that show, that's fine too. They're not principals, because you're making the decisions about that curatorial project, not them. I hope that helps.
I'll add actually one more thing that I think might be helpful. whenever you're talking about working with anybody in any way, I think in an application, it's really helpful to say why, like why them, you know, whether it is about technical skills, you have a past relationship, you've made work in, you know, on an ongoing basis, they've moved, like do make a case for why you're seeking particular collaborators or artists or technicians to work with if there's a good reason. Yeah, especially when they're not local. Yeah.
Awesome. Anything to add, Chris? Or
They did a perfect job.
awesome. All right, then I will go on to the next question. Could an applicant reach out to CARFAC to see if they have members who specialize in those things like fabricating and lighting, artists helping other artists kind of thing?
You know, we do have some lists, and obviously we try to find people for things like that. We would have less success with, you know, artists who or would know about fabricators and things like that. There's some artists who actually employ them. We would probably suggest, you know, you contact some of them, like who they are using. Obviously, in Calgary and Cochrane and stuff like that, there are people who do, you know, certain kind of sculptural processes and things like that. So there's a lot of things that can happen in Alberta. Some processes, we would know the artists who are using them, and some of them are going to places like Germany and stuff like that. It depends on very specific things. We do usually know of artists. So, but do we have an actual list? No. But yeah, they can reach out to us. You bet they can.
Sweet. Does AFA or CADA have any kind of list like that? Nope.
No,
Okay.
unfortunately, because we're government and funder, I can't actually refer people in general, be it
Mm,
grant writers I know, blah, 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 and so on. I'm not allowed to refer because it could show bias. So,
makes sense.
yeah.
Okay, doke. Next question. If you're clearly an older emerging artist, is this a disadvantage? Also, do you lose credibility if you have worked full-time on a job and work evenings and weekends on art? Just no across the board. That doesn't matter.
No,
And
I mean, I think, yeah,
go,
Kari.
Taylor. No, you go, Taylor.
Okay, I was gonna say, I think, you know, we all know that, you know, you can come into an artistic practice at any age or stage of your life. So just because you're, you know, emerging in a sense as an older artist, that should not play a role or be a factor in the assessment of a grant. Those are often, I mean, I don't think age is, you know, certain things aren't even, I guess, visible in an application necessarily. So unless you're really speaking directly to it because it's important to your, you know, your practice and your experience, committees don't really know that information, and we would never encourage that kind of thought in, you know, in a facilitated conversation. If that was to be something that was spoken to, I think we would shut that down pretty quick. So yeah, no, everyone has other jobs. You know, you can't always make your full living off of your artistic practice. So having other jobs and work and just fitting it in where you can is a reality for a lot of artists. So
What she said. And
Yeah.
and also too, kind of extending on what you asked, many artists will come and go in their practice when life happens. That's okay too. And if there's a large, say there's a 10-year gap, that's happened for me, for example, when you're coming back into your practice again, feel free to include a statement of, you know, I had this hiatus in my practice, it was intentional, now I'm getting back into it. But yeah, I second what Taylor said.
Awesome.
And to some extent, age might even be an advantage too. You know, there's galleries now that are just accepting people that are over 60. There's new ways of looking at these things. It's an arts career is so different from every other career. It's not just about youth anymore. It's about so many other things. So I would never think that, you know, I mean, obviously there, you might not want to necessarily put your age on your CV, but it's not a disadvantage.
No,
Okay, cool.
and it may show on your CV in the sense of if you have a BFA in 1970,
Yeah.
that's the only place it's going to show, is if you have it there.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you, guys. The next question is, could I pay myself artist and living fees? What about 2 artist fees, say for one for research hours and one for photography?
yeah,
Double
Yeah.
dipping in the AFA's case, one or the other.
I would say, you pick the one that's most suited to the project and the work. So for CADA, we do offer you to pay yourself an artist fee or subsistence, but it's really dependent on the project, the work, like the discipline, all of these things. So you would probably frame it as one thing. So whether
Same
it's
here. Yeah, same here. Whichever one you pick, you got to go with it.
Okie doke. Nothing to add, Chris, I'm assuming?
No, that's perfect.
I just always have to ask. And then final question, for a newly incorporated society that has yet to achieve nonprofit status, which is considered pending right now, are there currently any grants for which this organization is eligible from CADA or AFA?
For AFA, you would have typically been, if you are not actually a legal organization yet, you could technically apply for the individual artist grant as a collective. Yeah, and if you become that society, AFA typically has project grants for organizations in a non-COVID regular kind of life year. But reach out to me if you're interested in AFA, because still there would be eligibility questions in terms of your activities and so on, and who you are. And Taylor and Chris.
Yeah, that's basically the exact same. So when you're kind of in that middle area, collective, when we define collective, is you're not a registered nonprofit, but you're also not operating in that way. But if you're kind of in that middle ground, there might be a way for you to still apply to a collective program before you get your status. And then once you have that, then you would move towards project grants for organizations or organizational operating grants and things like that.
Okay,
So
cool.
I have one question to ask, Kari and Taylor. Are you thinking of grants for these there's so many new kind of hybrid galleries and things like that? Are you thinking of that in your future? I just want to know if both the AFA and Calgary Arts Development is thinking about that and how to deal with these new organizations that are probably going to be developing post-COVID.
Yeah, I'm sure we are. And it's probably more so on my the other side of my team, Marta and Melissa working in the organizational side of things. I know that those conversations are happening, and that even last year I think we sort of played with eligibility for organizations. Do you actually need to be a registered nonprofit, or if you operate in such a similar way, could you still apply? And we did allow that for a program just to kind of see. It had its challenges and benefits, but also I think when our main shareholders and everything, all our money is coming from the city of Calgary, we do have stipulations there around what we can and cannot fund, and so there would that would be an ongoing, I guess, exploration into really knowing what the rules are and where we can kind of make exceptions, or especially with new things that are emerging.
Awesome, thank you guys. He did add that he is a legal business, but just not registered, I guess, not for profit yet. I don't know if that changes. Sorry, go ahead.
It does. I remember Taylor earlier mentioned something about you had grants for small business activity for people. I don't know the context of that, but one thing for AFA that's really important to know, we do not support for-profit commercial activities, entrepreneurial endeavors. If you are a collective that is a service provider and you want to apply for the individual artist grant, that's not going to be a fit, because the focus of the individual artist grant is on benefit to the individual artist or the artists in that collective. So if you want to start up a printing press for artists to create artist books, that's going to be seen as publication. So unless you have a specific project around that service provision, like your collective is going to do a curatorial project, that might be eligible. So those are things that are specific to AFA that are really good to be aware of. And cultural industries and applied arts, we don't support either. Graphic arts, fashion, architecture, the industry side of publication and film, because the Alberta government does have a cultural industries portfolio and grants and programs to support those kinds of creative endeavors in the province as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. Unless there's any other questions, because we have like 2 minutes, but I don't think there is so far. I wanted to say to everyone, I will be uploading this video as soon as I can, probably by Monday, because I have to do some rendering. And as well, I'll be sending out any information that Kari, Taylor, or Chris has sent to me to any of the links. If you didn't register through our Canada Helps page, I probably don't have your email. So you're going to have to email me at earprogramming@gmail.com. Other than that, thank you guys so much for presenting. I'm going to unmute Jill because she's waving at me. Jill, you're still muted.
I
Yeah.
had to take a phone call and I got muted and I couldn't unmute myself again.
Okay.
Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks again so much, you guys, for doing this again. As usual, you're all so welcome and so valued. And I think we've had a record number of visitors today coming to hear you, and it's been amazing. So thank you all so much. Mwah. You're amazing.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. Thank you. All right. I'm going to probably end the meeting now. Oh, one new message. Sorry. Oh, never mind. I just want to make sure there's no questions.
Yep. Thank you all so much.
Okay, cool.
Take
See you
care,
guys later.
stay safe and stay warm out there.
Yeah.